I want to thank everybody for joining us today for a presentation on some grant and loan funding options that are for public dam and canal owners. My name is Lynette Jones. I'm a certified grant writer with Great West Engineering, and I am working with, we are working with the NRC Dam Safety Program to provide this webinar. And as you just heard, recording has started. And so what that means is that DNRC is recording this webinar so that we can provide it on the DNRC Dam Safety Program website for everybody to review at a later date. And as we go through this presentation, I will be showing you some features of the Dam Safety Program website that has been updated that provides a lot of information on grant funding now. So also joining me today is Jeremiah Faze. He is an engineer with Great West Engineering. Before we get started, I want to just kind of review a little bit of the features with Zoom webinar, which is a little bit different than Zoom meetings. And so as participants that have joined this webinar, you have the ability to do two different things. And if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of your screen, those options should pop up for you. And one of those is the chat box. We are encouraging folks to ask questions via the chat box. Jeremiah and myself will be answering those questions as we can. And then we also have Nadine and Chad from the DNRC office who've joined us to gather the questions that we are not able to answer by chat so that we can answer those at the end of the webinar. So you can use that chat box in that way. There is also an option to raise your hand. And the raise your hand feature, one of the things that we're trying to do is keep all the questions till the end. However, if you do have an item that you need clarified, so if there's something that I said that just didn't seem right and you need clarification, please raise your hand so that we can answer that question for you. And Nadine will let me know if you've raised your hand, and then we can unmute you. You'll have to accept that. So you'll see something pop up that says I accept to be unmuted, and then you can ask that clarification. But otherwise, if you just have a question, please put those in the chat box and we will get to those. The other thing that I'm going to do right now before we get started is in the chat box, I'm going to enter a link for some handouts. So there's a password to the link. There's 3 handouts that are associated with this webinar, and those handouts will be useful for you. And so you can click on that link either now or at the end of the meeting and download those documents for you can save them or print them or whatever you need to do. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that I want to talk about here is today we have the webinar for public dam and canal owners. And what does public mean? So public entities are going to be like the state, city, towns, counties. We also have irrigation districts, conservation districts, water and sewer districts, and those entities are considered public. And so the funding that I am going to be looking at, or that you're going to be looking at today, is funding that is available for public entities. However, if you are a private entity and you're on today, it is good information because you can partner with a public entity. And that's something that we will actually cover tomorrow in our private dam and canal owner funding webinar. That's tomorrow at 10 a.m. And again, both of these will be shared on the Dam and Safety Program website, so you'll have this information. All right. Okay, so today what we're going to be looking at we're going to be discussing project type, understanding your project type, the funding cycles for public funding. And we'll go through a case study that utilized some of these public funds and how they utilized it and what that looked like. And then we'll be talking about the different grant opportunities for getting a project off the ground. So that would be your planning grants, and then getting the project implemented, which would be your construction grants. And we'll also cover some current and upcoming grant funding opportunities. So project type, one of the things when you're looking at your project, a lot of times what we tend to focus on is what needs to be fixed. So I have a head gate that needs to be fixed. I have a diversion structure that needs to be fixed. But the way that grant funding works is that we want to think about what benefits the project has on a higher level. So if you look at your entire project, you're going to be trying to think about, does it have a benefit to native fish or frogs? Does it provide municipal drinking water? Does it protect, conserve, develop, or manage a water resource? Does it provide wetland protection? Does it provide water for irrigation? And does it provide recreation to the public? Those are just some of the different kinds of benefits that your project can provide. And understanding that higher level benefit is going to help you narrow down your funding options and kind of understanding what kind of grant opportunities that you might have and be able to apply for. I'm going to click on this link down here. This is the DNRC dam safety website. And it's going to take us to the funding. This is the main website page. And I'm going to ask Chad from DNRC if you could just paste that into the chat so everybody has it for future reference. When you get into funding according to project type, you can go here. And this is going to narrow down some of the ideas. So this is what I'm talking about. If you understand your project type, you can answer one of these questions. And let's just say that your project provides irrigation. So you can click on it provides irrigation, and the grants and loans that you might be eligible for are listed here. They reference a page number. This page number is to a funding guide that Great West partnered with the Dam Safety Program to produce. And so you can reference those page numbers in the funding guide that's also available on the main page. I'll show you in a minute. And then also a case study that's similar to that. Yes.
I'll jump in real quick. It's only sharing your PowerPoint screen, not the website screen.
Oh, okay. Let me get over there. I didn't realize I had to go over. Okay. All right. I'll go back and forth. Is that better? Can you see the website now, Jeremiah?
Yep, we can see it now. Yep.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. So these are the same questions of the project type. So you can click on this project type. Canal provides irrigation, and it does provide the different grants and loans that you might be a good match for, and the page number to the funding guide. The funding guide is, so this is the main page again for the dam funding resources. The funding guide is located here, and that funding guide is in a PDF form, so you can download it to your print, and you can look at it either electronically or print it out. If you don't want to print it out, but you do want a hard copy, the Dam Safety Program would be more than happy to send you one, so you just have to get a hold of them. But this is a really good resource to understanding maybe what different types of grant funding that you would be eligible for. All right, let me go back over to the, okay. So the funding cycle. One of the things in the funding cycle is that this funding cycle is applicable to two main grants that fund public facility projects, irrigation projects, and dam projects. And those two programs are MSEP, which is Montana Coal Endowment Program. It was formerly TSEP, which is the Treasure State Endowment Program. So I'm going to refer to it as MSEP TSEP because they just changed their name, and I think more people are familiar with TSEP. And then there's also the DNRC Renewable Resource Grant and Loan Program. So this funding cycle applies to those two entities. These are the main funding sources for projects that are in the public realm. And so we're going to focus on this funding cycle just a little bit. One of the things with the funding cycle is that it starts with the planning grants. So this is kind of, July of 2021 is when the planning grants started. So we're starting in this year. Just know that you can add 2 years to this funding cycle, and you can start it in July of 2023, and then just add the years, change the years as you go around. And this funding cycle starts over every 2 years. And so we're currently just showing the current funding cycle, but in 2023, there will be more planning dollars. And so the funding cycle starts with planning grants, and planning grants we'll talk a little bit more about, but you're looking at further analysis of the issue that you have. And a lot of the grants that you're going to apply for as a public entity require planning before you apply for grants. And that planning can be in the form of a preliminary engineering report or a technical narrative or a feasibility study. And each grant does define exactly what needs to happen in order to apply for that grant. So we'll kind of move through this funding cycle. We're gonna talk about the planning grants, what they fund, and what kind of funding is available. And then we'll also talk about the construction, which is more in the design, bidding, and construction side, and what those construction grants cover and how to apply for those. But understanding this funding cycle will set you up for applying for funding in the right time period when it becomes available, so that you don't have to wait so long for putting in an application. You can kind of understand that. It looks like we have somebody who raised their hand. So let me go over here. Okay, Mike, can you hear me?
Yeah, and so are you saying that the next planning grant cycle doesn't open until 2023?
Thank you for that. So typically the planning grants in a year where we don't have this extra infrastructure money that's been coming in through ARPA, which is the American Rescue Plan Act, we would have planning grants usually last through the 2 years. So they have different funding deadlines. There's usually one in the summer of 2021, and then there would usually be one in the winter and then in the spring. And then if there was more left, they would actually open up other rounds in the next year, which would be 2022. However, right now, because of ARPA, all of the planning grants have been expended from MSEP and MSEP, TSEP, and DNRC. However, there is one possibility. The Infrastructure Advisory Commission that oversees the ARPA funding may release additional funds into planning grants, which would be the DNRC planning grants is what I would assume they would go into. And that might happen in maybe January or February. So it's something that we'll keep on our radar and share with the dam safety program if that does occur. But currently those funds are no longer available, although in typical years, those funds would be available for 2 years. Does that help answer that question?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, so we're going to utilize this funding cycle to we're going to discuss a case study in which this funding cycle is the process and that was used by the city of Libby to implement a project that they had. So I'm going to hand this over to Jeremiah.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, we're going to go through kind of a case study on the Flower Creek Dam, which is owned and operated by the city of Libby as a municipal water source. I think this is a good case study just to document and show all of the different types of grant and loan programs that were utilized for this dam rehab project. There's just about every type of funding scenario and grants program you could have was utilized here to be able to make this project affordable to the users. So the original dam was built in 1946. It's a high hazard facility. Dam was 59 feet tall, had about 280 feet acre storage. Originally built by Pacific Power and Light Company, and then the city of Libby purchased it in 1986 for municipal water use. That's the primary use, and why a lot of the grant programs that we'll talk about here are applicable to this project. So keep that in mind. The overall project, though, what was accomplished was replacing this dam with a new concrete gravity structure slightly downstream of the existing structure. So full dam replacement is the project. Go ahead, Lynette, let's go to the next slide. The primary issue with this dam was seepage through the concrete. There was quite a bit of leakage, and it was causing carbonation and iron leachate buildup on the face, probably likely due to high water to cement ratio in the original concrete makeup in 1946. There was various repair projects over time to try and minimize the seepage and leakage through the structure. In 1966, they did some patchwork on the upstream and downstream face. In 1995, they applied a synthetic liner on the upstream face to try and reduce seepage. But in the 2000s, early 2000s, the standard inspections determined or documented that there was significant seepage to the dam. And at that time, there was some coring done to determine, the competency of the concrete overall. And the effective strength of those corings was less than 1,000 PSI. So fairly weak concrete. That was a significant concern. There was a real high risk of failure of the dam from any type of seismic event, or even just standard reservoir cycling. If we were to drain and refill that, they could have a loss of that concrete structure. So it was a significant concern. So at that time, the city started investigation of different design alternatives, whether it be replacing the dam, rehabilitation of the dam, looking at alternative water sources or potential other water storage reservoirs for municipal use. And then ultimately they chose to replace the existing dam structure. And the overall total project cost was just over $11.5 million. It's a pretty substantial project. So these are just some photos of working through construction. Up there on the top left is the original concrete embankment structure. And then because the dam was located down, just downstream in a more conducive location for the new concrete structure, of course they had to lower the reservoir, put in cofferdams to dewater and direct flow around the work area. There was rock excavation associated with the work just to be able to anchor in the new structure. And then you can see a photo there on the bottom right of the finished new concrete gravity dam structure. Okay, so funding and how this was all put together. When the city was, after the corings were done and the city was, faced with challenging issues, they requested an emergency grant from the Environmental Contingency Fund through the state of $100,000, and these funds were helped to utilize investigation of their short-term emergency measures. What can they do in the interim? Also looking at alternatives and what their options were. And then it also helped fund and implement an early warning system because of the nature of the concrete and the realistic opportunity that this thing was going to fail. They wanted to get an early advanced warning system in place so that if they were to have a seismic event or reservoir cycling or something of the nature, that they were warning folks ahead of time. So that kind of kicked things off. And then through the process, now we're not aware, we're assuming that they got planning grants. We were just talking about that through TCEP and RRG, because they did ultimately have to put together a preliminary engineering report investigating all the alternatives and ultimately coming to a recommendation on the type of structure and project that was going to be recommended through the engineering analysis. So we're assuming they did that. But as far as construction grants go, they got TSEP, MSEP grant of $750,000. They were successful in getting a renewable resource grant through the DNRC of $100,000. They were eligible for a CDBG grant, and this was because it's a municipal water source, and they had almost 67% low to moderate income, so they are eligible for CDBG as well. And then I think the really neat component of this is they got an USDA Rural Development Loan Grant Program package, and of the $8.8 million they requested, 58% of that was a grant. So they only, the loan amount of the RD loan was $3.7 million. They did get a DNRC RRG loan as well of $800,000, and then the city contributed $581,000, and that was preliminary design services, administration, which was kind of in-kind work on the grant, and some of the engineering design fees that the city paid for themselves and used as match to those other projects. So all told, they were $4.5 million loan, and then the rest of that $11.5 million project was grant funded. So 60% grant funded on this project overall. And again, it was public owner, municipal water source, but they were very creative in how they put together a funding package for this dam replacement project. So pretty neat funding package overall. And with that, I will kind of turn it back over to Lynette now.
Thanks, Jeremiah. So one of the things on this screen that I just want to mention is the first bullet point, which is the Environmental Contingency Fund. That fund it's not really a grant application process. That fund exists due to Montana Code annotated. It's a fund that the governor has discretionary ability to award funds out of that are for emergency situations. And the way that the code is worded, it states that there needs to be high likelihood of failure. And they're not just talking about dams, it can also be erosion, irrigation area that is experiencing erosion, and therefore the irrigation system is likely to fail. And so that's an emergency grant that is a direct request from the governor's office. And all I know about that is that you would have to contact the governor's office and work with their team to determine the process for requesting those funds. And I know that they currently keep $750,000 in that fund, and they add $175,000 per year. The interest goes back into that fund as well. And so there is funds that are available for that if it is a big emergency like the Libby Dam, this new flower dam, the flower dam in Libby. So I don't really cover that one because it's not an application process, but I did want to mention that in case people are experiencing something that's more emergent, and that would be a good fit. All right, so the first thing that we will discuss is the planning phase of the project. And so as Jeremiah said, we assume that the city of Libby probably applied for planning grants because a preliminary engineering report is required for most grant sources as a public entity. And those preliminary engineering reports do have a higher price tag to them. I would say average price is about $50,000, but they can go up or down just depending on what is needed and what kind of analysis and review is needed. And so the planning grants come out in the summer of, I was just going to say odd years because this is an every other year cycle. So in odd years, it comes out every other year in odd years. Those funds are available in this funding cycle. And the two that are available that are part of the funding cycle are the DNRC Rural Renewable Resource Grant and Loan Program. That grant and loan program, the project type that it funds is the focus of the project must be on renewable resource conservation, management, development, and preservation projects. And so if you're looking at your project and it does any of those things, it would be a good fit to apply for a planning grant from DNRC. The maximum grant that is available is $15,000. There is not a match that is required for the DNRC planning grants, but typically that's not going to fund your entire preliminary engineering report. So there's going to have to be either an application to another program and or just funding out of your own entity's pocket to match that. The other program that fits this is the Montana Coal Endowment Program, which is the MSEP-TSEP program. And again, this one is up to $15,000 as well with a 50% match. The big thing with MSEP is that what they provide as far as planning grants are for drinking water systems. And so for this presentation, since we are talking to dam and canal owners, this is a good fit if you have a dam that provides drinking water. And that is really the source of this grant for this webinar. It's going to be if you provide that drinking water system. It's not going to be a good fit for irrigation, but the DNRC Renewable Resource Grant Loan Program is going to be a good fit for irrigation. And so that could be something that you could look into. And then right here, this W2ASACT is what we call WASAC. It's the Water, Wastewater, and Solid Waste Action Coordination Team. And I'm going to share this with you. Let me switch screens really quick. Okay, so what this is this entity exists to provide technical assistance and information about the different grant programs that fund public facility projects. Public facility is drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, those kinds of things. And it is a really good source. In the link that I sent you in the chat, there is a handout in that link that shows the different funding sources that are available to public facilities. It's kind of a 3-page spreadsheet that provides a lot of information as well as contact information on different programs that are available. And I wanted to point out this group because they do provide a lot of information and they answer a lot of questions, and they're here to help entities understand how this funding works. And so that information is really this group is really great if you have questions. I keep doing that. Let's see. Okay. So these are the 2 planning grants that are in that funding cycle. So this is that biennium where it releases every other year. And just like I was telling Mike, there may be some more funds that are released in the spring from that Infrastructure Advisory Commission. There might be some more money that's put into this DNRC planning grants, which I would say that is for the people on this call, I assume this one is going to be a much better fit because this one is just limited to dams with drinking water systems. All right. So there's also planning grants that are not in the funding cycle. And these 2 entities are FEMA related grants. And one of the one thing with these 2 grants that are in common, or I guess there's more than one, there's a couple things, is that both of these are high hazard potential, high hazard and maybe a high likelihood of failure for dams. And so there's kind of more, it's not an emergency in the way that Libby's dam was an emergency, but it's a more emergent need, I guess, is what you would look at for these 2 grants. And so your high hazard potential dam and your building resilient infrastructure and communities grants are available. They're available on a federal level. But what happens is you work with the Department of Environmental Services to apply for these grants, and DES actually submits the applications to FEMA for review to see if any of these will get funded. But both of them also have planning grants that are available as part of their grant. The high hazard potential dams has a 35% match. And the way that they look at the high hazard program looks at funding projects is in phases. So if you have a phase project, the first phase could be your risk/analysis. So you're looking at what the risk is and the analysis of that risk. Maybe the second phase is doing the planning and the feasibility study to understand what your options and solutions might be, so your preliminary engineering report. And then a third time you might apply for maybe just the engineering, although I would say applying for the engineering and construction together makes a lot more sense. So maybe there's a phase 3 with engineering, or a phase 3 that includes engineering and construction. And the reason for that is because these grants have a 36-month period of performance. And so these funds do need to be used in that 36-month period. And when you have a dam project that has a high likelihood of failure or is looked at in that way, it often is going to take more than a 36-month period to complete that project. So you can break it up and fund that project in phases. And one of those phases is planning and feasibility. So the high hazard potential dam grant is a good one for that. The Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, it's also called BRIC, is a good entity for planning. It provides up to $500,000. And you have a 25% match that you'll need to provide. And it provides funds for mitigation planning and planning related activities for dam projects that are highly likely to fail. And also that provide floodwater storage and diversion. Again, this program, you would work with the Department of Emergency Services to submit an application to that department, and then that department works to submit the application to FEMA. One of the things that we always like to discuss is the level of planning. When you're getting a planning grant, there is different levels of planning depending on what kind of planning document you are putting together. So the planning grants are utilized to provide additional analysis to understand the problem, or to understand if there is a particular solution to the problem that's feasible. So those different planning documents are a preliminary engineering report, which we often refer to as a PER, feasibility studies, environmental assessments, etc. And each of those different planning documents provide a certain level of analysis. So if you're looking at a feasibility study, it's looking at a 10% analysis of what the particular solution might be that's feasible to the problem that's been identified. And in a preliminary engineering report, it's a 30% analysis of that for the preliminary engineering. And so again, it's going to look at 30% of that particular solution to the problem that's been identified, and how feasible it is. And so it does give a lot of, what both of these documents do is it gives the entity who wants to look at these problems, it's going to give you a good cost estimate. It's going to give you a lot of different alternatives that might be solutions for the problem. It's going to have recommendations for what the preferred alternative might be. And that preferred alternative, just keep in mind when there's one of these documents getting put together by an engineering firm, we're working hand in hand with you to identify what that preferred alternative is for various reasons. And so you do have a say in what that preferred alternative might look like. And so when you go into looking at a construction grant, you want to just understand that construction grants are not just for construction. They're also to cover preliminary engineering. So if you had your preliminary engineering report and that 30% analysis completed, you have 70% of preliminary engineering left. And so your construction grant can cover that 70%. And you also have not completed design yet, because when you're just looking at the planning level, you're not designing anything. And so that final design needs to be completed, and that can be 100% of that can be part of your construction project. And engineering construction can also be 100% of that construction grant. So that includes bidding, construction management, and construction observation. And then obviously it's going to provide construction of the project. So the next thing that we're going to be talking about are construction grants. And so I wanted you to just see that construction grants cover more than construction. They will cover the rest of your engineering that needs to be completed, since the planning only covers 10 to 30% analysis of the problem. All right, so the construction phase of the project. And again, this is that timeline for project implementation. And the way that we look at this from Great West perspective with our clients is we start to apply for the planning grants that are available in the summer of odd years. So this summer, we applied for those planning grants. And as they're awarded, they're being awarded right now during the fall. So as those projects are awarded, we work through the winter and spring to put together and finalize the PER for that entity. And then we apply for, in this cycle right here, we apply for grants in May and June of 2022. And again, the two grants that are available are the MSTEP and TSTEP grant, and the DNRC Renewable Resource Grant and Loan Program are part of this construction phase and this timeline. So we'll be applying for those for entities in May and June. And then what happens at that point in time is the legislature does not meet until January, April 2023. And so what I like to say is during this time, that's a long period of time. It's about 6 months before they start meeting, and the awards don't come out again until May of 2023. So that's almost a full year from when you applied for the project. And what I always say during that full year is that's your opportunity to apply for other grants that might be available for your project, to look at how you're going to fund the gap, what kind of loan options are out there, and what that can look like for your project. And so there is a lot to do in that year, so that if you are awarded funds in May of 2023, you can move forward with starting to do the preliminary engineering and final design right away for your project, because you have all the parts and pieces together and you're ready to move forward. But then when everything is awarded in May of 2023, then you can start looking at design of a project, July to December of 2023, bidding in January 2024, and construction in March of 2024. And that's if everything goes as planned and there's no hiccups in the project, or you don't run into anything that needs further analysis. And so just, you can see for a perfect project, it's a 2-year timeline just to get to construction. And there's a lot of projects that are not perfect. And so it can be up to 3 years before you ever get to construction. And that's why this timeline, understanding how it works and how it flows, is really important for the funding of those 2 grant programs. So the 2 public construction grants in the funding cycle include the DNRC RRGL grant and the Montana Coal Endowment Program. The DNRC RRGL grant is up to $125,000. There is no match required, but it is a 25% match if applying on behalf of a private entity. So one of the things we'll talk about tomorrow in our webinar is how private entities can partner with public entities to apply for some of these grant opportunities. And so that's what that match means. The type of projects that are funded are drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, and irrigation projects that benefit a water resource. There are also dam projects that can be funded under this RRGL grant. They have to meet the eligibility requirements under the Clean Water State Revolving Fund program. And basically what you're looking at is if the dam provides irrigation and the project is tied to the clean water guidelines, which a lot of the guidelines refer to keeping pollution out of the waterways, so reducing turbidity, that kind of thing, then it could be a good fit. But not all dam projects are going to be a good fit under RRGL. It just really depends on what the fix might be and what the focus of that problem is. And then your Montana Coal Endowment Program, that's the MSTEP TSTEP grant. There's you can get up to $750,000 from that program. And again, this program is only going to be really good for dams that provide drinking water. And so how the up to $750,000 works really depends on user rates. And there's a whole equation that goes into it. But they provide either $500,000, $625,000, or $750,000, depending on your user rates. And they do require up to a 50% match. And now I'm going to go over some public construction grants that are not in the funding cycle. And so the different kinds of construction grants that are not in the funding cycle are your community development block grant. Community development block grants are currently up to $600,000. I say currently because they were just due at the end of October and they allowed for $600,000. This is the first time that community development block grants allowed up to $600,000. And they don't know if that's going to continue or if they're going to go back down to the $450,000 limit. And so we'll just kind of keep an eye on that and see what happens. It may go back down to just $450,000 next year. There is a 25% match for this program. And in order to be eligible to apply for this grant, a community must demonstrate that at least 51% of the project beneficiaries are low or moderate income. And also CDBG in the instance of this webinar is really only going to be useful for dams that provide drinking water. All right, and some more public construction opportunities that are out of the funding cycle are irrigation development grants. So this is a DNRC program, and this is specifically funds for construction of canal linings, head gates, and irrigation infrastructure. The grant is available up to $20,000 with no match required. The irrigation development grants are reviewed on a quarterly basis, and they do open up the applications. It's not currently open, but I believe that it'll open up sometime either towards the end of this year or the early part of 2022. There's also conservation district grants that up to $20,000 no match, but over $20,000 there's a 50% match. And conservation districts, one of the things to keep in mind, if you're not a conservation district, so you're an irrigation district, and you want to be eligible for this funding, you can partner with your conservation district. There's 58 different conservation districts in the state of Montana. And if it's a good fit for what conservation districts focus on, they can apply on your behalf for a construction grant. And so that's just another way of looking at how you can get funds for a project and build up that match and build up more money to fund your project. And then the next one is our ARPA irrigation grant program, and ARPA stands for American Rescue Plan Act. This program is brand new. The American Rescue Plan Act released a lot of funds into water and wastewater, and including in that is irrigation projects are eligible for this money. The Infrastructure Advisory Commission that oversees this funding at the state level in September decided to put aside $10 million specifically for irrigation projects. Those irrigation projects were not competing well in the big ARPA competitive cycle. And because of that, they wanted to ensure that irrigation projects could receive some funding. So the website is the arpa.mt.gov is the best place to continue to keep an eye on it. They are updating the guidelines. There were draft guidelines that were out for about a month. And the Infrastructure Advisory Commission took comments on October 19th. And now DNRC is revising those guidelines and revising the application, and it should be released here in the next couple of weeks. But basically this grant is gonna provide up to $500,000. And the emergency funds of $1 million actually just got scrapped in that meeting. And so I should have taken that off the slide. They've decided to only offer $500,000 grants, regardless if it's an emergency or not. They're just going to do $500,000. So that's going to be the max opportunity for those. It is a one-time funding source. There's not necessarily a match that's required, but you want to provide some sort of a match, even if it's in kind, because you're not going to rank high enough if you don't provide some sort of a match. They give a lot of points to providing a match of some sort for these grants. The application is going to be due in January 14th of 2022. And it's for agricultural irrigation projects that protect water quality from non-point source pollution. And unfortunately, at this point in time, dams that provide the irrigation are not considered eligible for this funding. They're looking at solely the irrigation infrastructure for this irrigation grant opportunity. One of the things I should mention is that might change. There has been comments to try to get clarification from the federal government if we can allow dams to be eligible for this opportunity. The federal entity, which is the Treasury Department, has indicated that dams are not eligible. And I know that the NRC is working with Infrastructure Advisory Commission to try to get those funds available for dams, but I don't know if it'll happen in time for this deadline. And then the next one that's available is the ARPA competitive grant. And again, for the purposes of this webinar, if you are a dam that provides municipal drinking water, then this ARPA competitive grant would be a good fit for applying to it. It does fund up to $2 million. They did round one, which was due, I believe, in July of 2022, and round two is coming up, and it's due January 14th of 2022 with a 50% match. And again, there's 125 million available. So it is going to fund, I think the first round funded about 73 projects. And irrigation projects are allowed to apply for the ARPA competitive grant. However, they're just not as competitive as the public facilities infrastructure. And so to be competitive, they pulled out that 10 million for the ARPA irrigation grant, and that's just going to be a better opportunity for folks to apply under ARPA irrigation if you're looking at an irrigation project. And then again, the public construction grants, I talked about these in reference to the planning grants, your high hazard potential dam and your building resilient infrastructure communities program. That high hazard potential dam, if you look at it in phases, you could do a planning grant and then you could do a grant for engineering construction. And again, both of these opportunities are available for dams that have a high likelihood to fail. And obviously that's a definition that is defined by usually your state when you're getting those dam inspections and it comes back as a project that really needs to look at different ways, kind of like the Libby Dam. It had a high potential to fail, so it has other opportunities for funding that's available. I will say that both of these programs are really challenging to apply for. And so working with an engineering firm that has experience in applying for both of these grant opportunities is going to help you be most competitive. And also the rules for each of these programs are changing. Currently, the high hazard potential dam program, the state of Montana did not apply for the funding last year because of the rules that are in that program. None of the communities would actually be eligible. But at the federal level, the infrastructure bill that's trying to move through the legislature at the federal level, it would put a lot of money for dams into the high hazard potential dam program. And in doing so, the rules would change so that dams in Montana would be eligible for that program again. And so the high hazard potential dam program is a good one to watch for if you do have a dam that needs a lot of improvements. And then the last part is funding the gap. So when you get your grants, I think Jeremiah said the city of Libby, the Flower Dam, was 60% grant funded. And so you have 60% of your funding in grants, but you do need to fund the gap through some public construction loans. So there are different loans that are available to entities that are public. You've got your DNRC Renewable Resource Grant Loan Program. All of these loan programs are based on your ability to pay. And typically as a public entity, you would have user rates of some sort. And it's going to be based on those user rates and the ability to increase the user rates, but still keep them affordable for users and then paying off that loan. The RRGL loan program is good for publicly owned dams and irrigation infrastructure. And the number of years is based on how long that asset, the asset that you're improving, the lifespan of that asset. And so they're going to look at that, and that's how long they're going to consider putting the loan term. So 10 to 20 years is something that's very typical. The Montana State Revolving Loan Fund, there's two different funds. There's the Drinking Water SRF Fund and the Clean Water SRF Fund. If you're a dam that provides drinking water, the drinking water SRF fund is the one that you would be looking at utilizing. And SRF provides, usually what happens is they provide a loan with an opportunity for loan forgiveness. If you're drinking water, if you're a dam that provides drinking water, it's going to provide forgiveness of up to $500,000. Irrigation projects and dams that provide irrigation fit under the Clean Water SRF program. And in that program, those funds are more limited. There is a forgiveness option, but it's a lot more limited. And it's up to $350,000. And it's dependent on the community's MHI. So you do want to, the community has to have a low MHI, which means it's a median household income is low, and there's a need for that loan forgiveness. And then we have rural development. Rural development only provides funds for public water and wastewater facilities. So this is going to be good if you have a dam that provides municipal drinking water. It's for rural areas with a population of less than 10,000, not $10,000, but a population of less than 10,000. There's a 40-year loan, and their interest rates are fairly low. If your MHI, your median household income, is again low, then you have an opportunity for an RD grant. The city of Libby has a low to moderate income percentage of, like, I think it was 66% at the time. And so they received a high grant. I think it was somewhere around 58% was in grant funding. And usually the expectation for rural development, if you do have a lower MHI, you can expect up to typically a 25% RD grant. But then if the community is experiencing, is poorer, then they might be able to put in more money like they did for the city of Libby. A final public construction loan is Intercap. Montana Board of Investments provides this opportunity. And Intercap is good for short-term loans. So a lot of times in your project, you have either pre-development funds, like trying to figure out how to pay for engineering up front before your loan actually comes, is available to be drawn off of. A lot of loans cannot be utilized until you actually hit construction, but you've got all of that engineering before you get to construction. And so this is a good option for those pre-development funds to pay for that engineering up front. And then your main loan would come in and pay this off after about a year or so. And so you can use it in that way. It has a higher percentage rate as a long-term loan, but if you're having a challenging time qualifying for loans, this is a good opportunity to look at. The short-term percentage rate is 1.65%, and the long-term percentage rate is as high as 6%. And I believe that they only fund up to 10 years. So that's something else to consider when looking at this program. But it can be used for water and wastewater projects, including irrigation. It can also be used for planning, grant writing, and construction. And so there are communities that have received grants for planning, but they don't have any cash flow to put the match in. And so they use Intercap as the match. They take out a loan for paying for the other part of their planning document and any grant writing that they might need for a project. So the current and upcoming funding. Keep in mind, to be competitive with ARPA funding, at minimum, a technical memo is going to be needed to submit the grant. If you have more than a technical memo, you're going to score higher, but you need at least a technical memo in order to submit the grant. And for the MSEP, TSEP, and the RRGL grants, they require either a technical narrative or a preliminary engineering report. So you do need to plan for that in order to be ready to apply for those grant opportunities in May and June of 2022. And then underneath here is just a list of the different grants that are coming up in the next, 8 to 10 months that you would want to keep on your radar. So the ARPA competitive grant and the ARPA agriculture irrigation grant, those are due January 14th of 2022. And you will need at least a technical memo and some sort of a match in order to be competitive for that program. And then you have your Montana Coal Endowment Program, which was also TSEP. Those are going to be due in either May or June of 2022. The DNRC Renewable Resource Grant Loan Program, those are going to be due in May 15th of 2022. And then you have the two larger federal grant opportunities for dams that are highly likely to fail. You have a high hazard potential dam and the BRIC grant. Those, the high hazard potential dam program the funds are committed to the Department of Environmental Services in July of 2022, and you can coordinate with them for coordinate with the dam safety program for eligibility. And then the BRIC grants are going to be due to the state on December 10th of 2022. All right, questions. One of the things on the dam resource, dam safety program website that I've been showing you, there is a frequently asked questions section where we cover a lot of answers to frequently asked questions. I would say that there's probably at least 30 frequently asked questions there. So that's something to take a look at as well. But I just like to open up for questions. So I do have a couple of questions that came in. And one of the questions is, are there many dam owners utilizing the high hazard potential dam program? And so like I was saying, that not currently in Montana because the eligibility requirements are stringent. The dam has to be considered an unacceptable risk to the public and have 100 and have a higher population at risk for that failure. And so last year, the state did not apply for that funding, but we're hoping that those rules change so that communities in Montana are eligible for that funding in the future. And then another question is, will any of this infrastructure money be available for dams? And so the infrastructure money, I'm assuming, is infrastructure money at the federal level. And they are currently have draft legislation that would put a large amount of funding into dam rehabilitation. And again, that would come out of the high hazard dam program. And in that high hazard dam program, the state of Montana has put in a lot of comments about that program not being able to be utilized by our state because we have a lower population. And so a lot of those rules and requirements would be changing when that money comes into that program. And so the dam safety program, I think Chad shared the link for the website for the program. Great West has worked with DNRC dam safety program to update the website to provide all this funding information for dam and canal operators. And there is a news section on that website, and any news that comes up about information that's going to be available will be posted there. And I know that they put out their quarterly bulletin, and in that quarterly bulletin, that information will be posted as well. All right, do we have any other questions? All right, Jeremiah, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you covered it well. I'm not seeing any hands raised or any questions in the chat. So
Okay.
Thanks for all your efforts there, Lynette, and getting the information out. And I guess the only thing if folks have additional questions that you don't want to bring up here, feel free to reach out to Lynette. Her email address and phone number is on the screen there. Or like she said, the dam safety website and the funding resources have a lot of information now related to the different grant programs and frequently asked questions. And so there's a lot of resources now available to dam owners. But if you have specifics, reach out to us as well. And I guess that's it.
All right. Well, thank you. And look for this webinar to be posted on the dam safety program website. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.